You know, I've seen a lot of reimaginings and reinventions of classic fairy tales. Some have been really good, others have been really bad, and others aren't even fairy tales. They're just stories pretending to be a fairy tale because they've named a character Belle, Beast, or Cinderella or something like that. But every now and then, a fairy tale reimagining comes along that is just too much fun to put down. And one such story is Yuki Kawaguchi's Hunter's Guild, Red Hood. Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem, not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. Now before I launch into my review and recommendation for Hunter's Guild, let's first talk about fairy tales for a brief minute. Fairy tales are like the younger brother to myths. They exist as a fantastical story that help to explain the world around us. They don't really teach us moral lessons like fables do, and they aren't allegories. And unlike myths, fairy tales don't establish sweeping world building or ground our understanding of history. Instead, fairy tales embrace large themes such as doing good to others, good versus evil, love conquers all, or the harshness of the world, the importance of faith, family, or caring. Or they can pull back the curtain and expose the world's darkness. Simple character traits such as beauty, craftiness, virtue, humility, or pride define most characters in fairy tales, and it is these attributes that take them far throughout the story. And as a result, all of these things together make fairy tales strangely complex and ridiculously straightforward at the same time. A fairy tale can also be broken down to simple literary components, like the importance of the number 3 and the roles of the maiden, mother, and crone. A fantastical element that resolves everything, something like a Deus Ex Machina, and this is the only time that Deus Ex Machinas are acceptable, when they are in fairy tales. Stuff like this is introduced in order to wrap everything up. But even then, understanding these elements, it can be very difficult to actually create a good fairy tale. Oddly enough. Take, for example, the story Stardust. I love the movie Stardust, and the book is also really good. And the story is described by Neil Gaiman as a fairy tale for adults. And I can say, after having watched the movie and read the book, that neither really are fairy tales. Instead, they are a fun adventure that fit adult sensibilities and humor. In short, it's hard to write a classic-style fairy tale. And I think that's because we normally go so deep into our own stories and we kind of get carried away. On one hand, we have Disney, which has made a great number of reimaginings and retellings of classic fairy tales, and they have seriously cleaned them up. And on another hand, we have stories that have gone way too far into the darker elements of fairy tales, and they just get lost in the weeds and become nihilistic and overall pointless. And far more often, what we really see are modern creators playing around with fairy tale elements to bolster an original story. RWBY and the Lunar Chronicles would probably be some of the best examples of this. So then, where does Hunter's Guild, a manga, fall on this spectrum of fairy tales? The answer is, it's far closer to a fairy tale than you might think. Kawaguchi is clearly telling his own story, which is a reimagining of some classic fairy tales. And he asks a question which has been asked before. What if all the fairy tales you've ever heard of were real? But in this case, the people asking that question are already living through the fairy tale. And throughout the story, we do have the roles of the maiden, mother, and crone all filled in. The role of the virtuous young protagonist, or maiden, is Velu. And the guiding, sometimes strict, sometimes villainous adult, or the mother, is Grim. And the sometimes good, sometimes evil elderly character with all the answers, or the crone, is the mayor. So these roles are actually well filled, which was something I wasn't expecting to see done. And the story's core theme is the power of the human spirit and will. Velu is desperately trying to be your typical shonen protagonist, believing that friendship and love will always win out. However, all the other characters are like, yeah, nope. It's the will of the human spirit and the boundless ingenuity of that human will that helps you to fight werewolves, not your love of family and friends. Therefore, we have our traditional fairy tale roles in this manga filled, and we have our larger fairy tale concept. Now, all of this is meshed together with the trappings of a shonen manga, and the world is expansive with a lot of various world-building elements thrown in, so it does go deeper than any fairy tale normally would. And there is that shameless ripoff of Cinderella because fire! So, final verdict. This is a fairy tale reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood with a smattering of other tales all thrown in. This is not an original fairy tale. Still, it's far from a bad story, and I was surprised that the story even faithfully follows some of the old fairy tale tropes and patterns. Honestly, I think it's worthy of a high recommendation, which brings me to my review. Hunter's Guild Red Hood tells the story of a young man's rise to become a monster hunter, and one monster hunter's quest for revenge and redemption. Velu lives in the mountains in a small hamlet beset by a ravenous werewolf. And though Velu swears to save the village, he's too small and inexperienced to make a difference. The mayor calls in a huntsman from the Hunter's Guild to deal with the werewolf. And you learn really quick that no one likes the hunters because they force you to pay through the nose for their services. And once the huntsman shows up, we get introduced to this strange lolly, Grim. But despite that sweet smile that we see at the very beginning, it's made clear how cynical Grim actually is. Velu accompanies Grim to the mountain lodge where they find a freshly consumed body, and the mayor's wife trembling in fear, only for it to be revealed all too late that she is the werewolf that's been attacking the town. That is when Kawaguchi pulls a pro-gamer move and makes the lolly an acceptable waifu. Oh yeah. With the help of a magical contraption, Grim can assume her real adult self for a short period of time. She attacks the werewolf, but is quickly swallowed. Velu grabs up an axe and splits the wolf's stomach, saving Grim, who leaves a nice basket of surprises for the werewolf. As they walk away from the monstrous explosion like the badasses they are, Grim recognizes the spirit of a hunter in Velu and wants to spirit him away to the guild. But the kid goes all shonen protagonist and says that he will stay in the hamlet to save the people. So Grim decides to change his mind by saving the whole village and eliminating all the werewolves in the area, which is a timely decision to make because a small pack have infiltrated the hamlets. So, a crazy battle ensues between the werewolf pack and Velu and Grim. It's honestly a really fun fight, and though most people focused on the Wolfonium, a magical blend of steel and silver used to kill werewolves, the real gem of this fight was the Chekhov's gun, which was indeed shot. I love that this joke was pulled. This crazy battle, though, ends in a sudden appearance from two power players from a dangerous group known as the Red List. They absolutely annihilate the hamlet, making Velu homeless and dealing Grim a crushing defeat. Together, the two retreat to the Hunter's Guild, where Velu can train and try out to become a hunter. This is where the manga currently stands. It's an obligatory training arc, which falls a lot into the same vein as Fire Force. It's kind of like Kawaguchi saying, ah yes, you've already seen this stuff before, so let's just cut to the chase and get this all out of the way so we can get to the really good stuff. There's obviously a lot more that will happen in the future. The manga is really just getting started, and already there have been a lot of twists and turns. And we'll have to just see where the story goes from here, but each chapter has been full of action and heart, making it a very engaging and fast-paced story thus far. I recommend this manga to everyone who is looking for a fun take on some classic fairy tales, and I enjoyed the blend of magic and technology that's prevalent throughout the manga so far. And I am a fan of how the story already delivers us with some huge enemies and mysteries to deal with down the road. The stakes have been very clearly established, and the grimmer attitude within the story is also a plus. While Velu is desperately trying to be a typical shonen protagonist, his world is already reshaping itself, and those more innocent notions are being transformed into something more mature and relatable. If the story keeps up with this trajectory, I think it will become a very engaging, complex, and thoughtful tale. The action also is really well paced, and the balance between the hunter's ridiculous weapons and the werewolf's powers and cunning is believable. You can tell Kawaguchi is having a ton of fun with these fight scenes and coming up with innovative ways to hurt and kill. Brandon Sanderson once said that it's better to err on the side of awesome, and the Hunter's Guild Red Hood makes a good argument for erring on the side of awesome. And if you need any further convincing, this series has not one, but two quality waifus. Grim is fantastic as the stoic badass, and Debonair has some extreme Mina Ashido energy going on. Anyway, I'm excited to see what else comes up in Hunter's Guild Red Hood, and I'm honestly thinking about diving further into what makes a fairy tale and analyzing that. I do have some plans of my own to tackle a retelling of fairy tales such as The White Snake on my own, or even the really fun one, Tischlein deck dich Gold Essel streck dich und Knüppel aus dem Sack. Yes, that is a real fairy tale. Go check it out. So, doing more research will definitely help me on that front whenever I get the time to tackle some fairy tale reimaginings of my own. Until then, if you are looking for more reviews, recommendations, and especially writing advice, please go check out our other videos and especially our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We also have writing exercises on our Pinterest page and discussions at our subreddit and our Discord. We'd love to have you join our community and come along with us on this adventure that we call writing. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.